Hello everyone, I'm Lara Paquette, and today I'm going to be doing a case study on the Empire of Gold, which is the third book in the Daevabad Trilogy. And I'm purposefully doing this final book in a trilogy to talk about endings, so obviously there's going to be spoilers if you haven't read the first two books, if you haven't finished this book. I highly recommend that you start with City of Brass and come back after you've read a few thousand pages. But before I get into the ending of these books themselves, I want to ask myself, why did I keep reading? What was it that compelled me through the first two books? And the first thing is the character arcs. And because this is a case study, I'm not going to talk about, every single way a character can change. Obviously, that's inexhaustible. But just in this particular book, how did the author manage to change these characters? And the main thing was their interactions with other characters. So a character, Ollie, Nari, they have their individual goals, they have what they want, but as they interact with each other, as they interact with their brother, their sister, their mom, their conflicting personalities, their conflicting goals kind of rub off on each other, and they change as they interact with other people. Another way is that they get what they want, and they're not fulfilled. So you have this goal, you finally attain it, and it doesn't matter. You see this with Dara. The three protagonists are Dara, Ali, and Nari. I'm going to be referencing them a lot, but Dara and Nari in particular, they get what they want. Nari, it's physical safety and money, food, whatever. Dara, it's his people have his kingdom, and neither of them are satisfied. They lose something for what they gain, and it shifts their motives. Another way that these characters change is that they have their normal modes of interacting, and for whatever reason they won't work. Either they're confined as a prisoner, or they have some sort of magical compulsion collar, or they're just also in a situation where if they do what they normally would do, they're just gonna get shot dead. So they have to think around the box. They have to shift their priorities and their habits to get what they want in a new manner. The final way, well, there's two more actually. Another way that they kind of change and grow throughout this book is characters who are forced to play a part, especially with Nari. They're forced to play a ruse, and they sort of just adapt into this ruse. They're forced to pretend that they care about these people, and so they spend time with these people, and now, they see what they're going through, and, they finally feel some empathy, and they go from being a con woman who will steal money from sick people to someone who's becoming a real doctor and genuinely risking her life to help other people. Finally, is characters learn new information that complicates their worldview. Ali starts out kind of a more fanatic character. He's definitely known as a fanatic, but in his mind, he's just being reasonable. And then he finds out that he's accidentally been supporting terrorists, and he just has this moment. Oh no, what have I done? And Dara has these moments as well. Nari to a lesser extent, but characters have one way of doing things, and they learn new information, and it just completely changes everything. So character arcs were really great in these books. Another point of interest was world building, and every book does world building, so I wanted to look specifically at what these books did and why it felt so fresh and unique. Besides it just being a setting that I haven't seen a lot, so of course Cairo, fantasy Cairo, that's going to be from the jump have being more compelling just because I haven't seen it so often. But particularly the writing, it has significance because in every single place, these places have significance to the characters or to the plot. This is a book that revolves around politics, so when the characters build a hospital, this isn't just a place of healing, this is a place where all these different fantasy races are going to come together, and they're going to have peace. So when this hospital is destroyed, it's not just, oh no, how are we going to heal these sick people? It's, the peace is broken, now we're at war. And so giving these places significance beyond just a physical building makes it feel a lot more real. The writer also does a good job of making the familiar new. So she describes Cairo and this medieval Cairo setting, but she describes Daevabad, this fantasy Deva city, in very similar terms. And so, I've never been to Cairo, but at least I understand what's there. I can picture it in my mind, and by kind of comparing and contrasting Cairo with this fantasy city, she's able to make this seem as if people could live there. It's something plausible. Lastly, for world building, the author does a very good job of describing senses besides sight. So obviously how something looks, that's the first thing we process. It's very important, but different senses connotate different things. When a character starts relying on hearing, at least personally, I get this sense of fast pace, of disorientation, of something not being right, because it's just a primal alert thing. You can't process what's going on all around you, and so you're starting to rely on on hearing things behind you, beside you, things you can't see. It's someone who's looking out and feels kind of afraid or disoriented. And then obviously, senses like taste, touch, these are much more visceral. Smell is very connected to memory, brings you back. So having all these different senses, having all this different imagery, really allows the place to feel much more three-dimensional than it otherwise would have been. And lastly, before I start talking about this book itself, is just the author writing what she loves. And I could tell the author's essay, Chakraborty, her religion before I finished the book and started looking her up, and it really comes through her personal beliefs in a good way. Sometimes people are expected to be objective, but a lot of times when people talk about objectivity, it seems more like this patronizing disdain. Um, but that doesn't make sense. So if you're writing about something you love, you're interested in that thing for its own sake, you're gonna think deeply about it, you're going to want to see it from every side, you're going to care about it for its own sake. Whereas when you hate something or you just really don't care, you're much more willing to see this flat picture. And I think a lot of the times we writers, you hear, write what you know all the time, but I think a more proper way to go about it is to say, write what you love, because when you love something, you're more interested in it and you care about it for its own sake, as opposed to just taking it at face value. And you're more invested in writing it realistically and writing it, empathetically, in a way that makes sense to the reader. You're not just writing what you would read on a Wikipedia page. You're writing how it feels, why it would compel a person, and why someone would truly think like that. But now, finally, moving on to what actually is said in this book. The first thing here in this Empire of Gold book is the recap, which, obviously you're starting on a third book. You want the readers to have some idea of what just happened. There's probably a year or so between books being published. So this recap starts out with characters kind of arguing about what just happened and how to move forward. And I think that's a really good way of doing things, because not only are you discussing what just happened, but you're discussing the significance of it, and you're discussing why it matters to these characters and their view on it. You get to kind of show your characterization as well as the plots. Next, there is the paradigm shift, and this book starts out with the characters losing their magic, and that's a very common theme in, well, not a common theme, but a common trope throughout fantasy, and there's a reason for it. Just like we talked about, characters changing based on their old ways of doing things, this forces characters to do things differently. It forces them to, well, it changes the world. Like, what if we lost electricity? There would be chaos, there would be people forming weird alliances, there would be people looking for someone else to blame, everyone would be operating differently, you would see different sides of people. It's the same thing when they lose their magic. Their entire world is shifted, and they have to shift with it. Next, with this book, there's the pause. And especially in the last book of a trilogy, the last book of a series, you really want to get to the action, you want this fast pace, blah, 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 fight, 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 fight. But to give characters a space to understand the stakes, to really choose what they're going to act, how they're going to act, it is a good moment for characterization. It shows the significance, and it shows that this character has truly changed, and this is who they truly are. They're not just acting on the spur of the moment. This characterization is for real. Similarly with that, we have the phenomena of going home again. And this is an opportunity to see how the character has changed by comparing them to their old world. And usually the book starts out with the character at home, or the character, going about their daily life, and to put them back into this new situation, into this old situation, instantly compares and contrasts them. Do they have something back home worth fighting for, or do they just have to move forward? Do the characters back home recognize them, or have they been inoperably changed? Next, you want to make sure that there are no easy outs. At one point in this book, about a third of the way through, it looked like the characters were going to be rescued by this creature. And I didn't really like it, but it was only about a third of the way through, so I thought, okay, it's still early on, we're in the first act, I'm willing to put up with it. But it turns out that this creature is much more complicated than it initially seems, and this relationship with the protagonist, with Ollie, is going to change everything for the rest of the book. And not only that, but it's going to get him into more trouble than it would have if they were just left to their own devices at the beginning. So basically, it just comes down to don't give your characters anything for free. And with that, the reason I was, frustrated with this, what appeared to be this easy rescue, was that in this final book, this should be where your characters shine. This is where your characters are making the most choices. They've gone home, let them have a chance to live happily ever after and come back. Let them realize they were wrong in the past and see whether they could do better. If there's a time to use backstory, this is something you really want to be cautious with. But if it's going to have an effect in the present, then your readers have already read 2 books. They're willing to put up with you. So if it will shed light on the current situation, then this would be an appropriate time to use backstory. And you can also use foil for your characters. So let the readers see that the protagonist's past actions have made a difference. So a foil character is someone who's similar to the protagonist in enough ways that they are easily compared, and yet they're different enough that you can see the differences between them. So, for instance, in this book, there's a woman who's ambitious, and kind of downtrodden, and she's easily compared to Nari. But whereas Nari is much more of a trickster, this other woman is much more of a fighter. This other woman is much more not narrow-minded, but has a much smaller circle, which is how Nari started out, kind of just caring for herself and her family. But now, by this point, she's fighting for the entire world. So with this foil character, you can kind of see how Nari has grown. Then, with this final book, you want to make sure you fulfill your promises to the reader. And your protagonist should have had, warring emotions, beliefs, and loyalties up to this point, and this is when they have to choose. So everything in the character's arc is coming to a point now, and you finally have to show everything that's leading up to your protagonist development comes here. This is where the character makes that final choice to be who they're going to be. But it's also a choice with the plot and the war. If you've been threatening war or murder or a horrendous marriage or whatever, time is up. This final book, and this is when that war has to come. If you've been talking about war for 2.5 books, you can't have it all end with a marriage pact. You have to do, give the reader what you've promised. Next, you want to concentrate on the individual in the epic scale, and we've seen this before in Dante, but just how does this author do it differently? And here it's accomplished because the main characters are forced to walk across and sail across this world. They've been cast out, they're back in Cairo, and now they're coming back to this magical world. And so as they pass through the lands, they're interacting with other people, they're seeing their enemies, their friends, and how this world has changed. And more than that, the characters, Ollie, his sister, and his brother are captured, and for Nari, it's her mother and her ex, Dara, who are now in charge. So if this goes bad, it's not just, oh no, the world is over, all our magic is gone, everyone's being slaughtered, but now it's, oh no, my mom and my ex are going to kill my boyfriend's brother and sister. So, it doesn't get much more individual than that. Next, you're going to see this fitting fates thing. I think this is the most important thing about a book as it ends. We've talked mostly about character development and having characters change and fulfilling those promises, giving them choices. But at the end, they have to have an end that makes sense with who they are. So one thing this book does very well is show this villain's fall and redemption, Dara. So it starts out, and we know, he's had a very hard life, and the other people, these bad people, they're the ones responsible. Ollie's family just messed it up for him, and they killed his sister, they destroyed his land. He genuinely has a reason to hate them. But as he goes to war for his people, he's kind of forced to choose between two bad things. And, he tries to choose the lesser evil, of course, but one evil leads to the next, and there's no good choices. And these short-term, bad decisions are rewarded, whereas when he tries to do good things, he kind of slaps down. And so, not only is our circumstances compelling him to do, these bad things, but it's also he starts to wallow in guilt, and this guilt kind of keeps him from coming back. But there's always doubt, and he never fully gives in. And so Dara starts to push back. He gets what he wants. He's ruling, and it's not what he's imagined. His people are not really any better off, and so he starts to push back against Nari's mom, and he pushes back, and there's these little baby steps that don't really do that much, but it's enough to show the reader that he is moving forward. And then Nari's mom, Menazea, enslaves him for it. And at this point, there is no reason for him to stand by her. She has just destroyed any motivation he had. One, he loves Nari. Two, he loves his people, and they are barely better off. Three, he has all this guilt, and he's finally been moving forward, finally kind of shedding it a little bit. And so at the end, he finally turns against her, finally, does the right thing. But it's not excused. He has done such terrible things. This man has, committed genocide. And it's never excused. It's never, oh man, you tried. But he goes off to basically spend millennia saving other people. And so it's not a full redemption. It's not an attaboy, there you go, everything's forgiven. But there is still a definite change, and there's this penance, and you see that, maybe in a few thousand years, because that's how long the guy's been alive, he's going to help people, and he's going to kind of become the person that he's wanted to be this entire time. Besides the redemption arc, there was also I thought one of the best romantic arcs I've seen in a while, with Nari and Ali. They're not codependent. They both have their very strong goals. For most of the first book, they're barely together. They say a few sentences every time they see each other, and that's it. But as time goes on, they're forced to work together. They're forced to kind of lower their walls when they do fight, and their families have been, at war for a very long time, centuries. They kind of fight fair, and they accuse each other of things that they actually did, instead of saying, well, your dad, committed genocide. Well, your mom committed genocide, because they're all terrible people. And so, this fighting fair allows them to kind of be more honest with each other. And with this, you also get their contrasting personalities. However, as they go on, as time goes on, and they're forced to work together, they see that even though they have their contrasting methods, they still have similar goals. And over this time, they begin to choose one another more than they, more than is strictly necessary as allies. So, but another thing is that this book is marketed as war and politics, and so that romantic arc never becomes this huge plot tumor that takes over everything. It's still all about the war, it's still all about the politics. It's just that this romantic arc allows for hope beyond this war. So that's all I got for now. I highly recommend Empire of Gold, the Daevabad Trilogy in general. If you liked it, hit like and subscribe.